Hi, my name is Varun. I'm a developer at Rangle.io, specializing mostly in mobile apps, and I also do a little bit of design. I'm going to be talking about the Ionic framework. I'm sure at this point I don't need to talk about the merits of building hybrid apps. We've been using PhoneGap for a while now, but HTML5 apps always seem to lag behind in performance. We just aren't able to match the performance you get from native UI kits when it comes to animation and building intuitive user experiences. But that's where Ionic comes in. It makes it a lot easier to match the native UI experience. So what do we get? Ionic is mobile optimized. It's open source, built with Angular.js, and it allows you to build highly interactive apps, bridging the gap between web and native. All the UI elements that you use with Ionic, they're basically Angular directives or Angular services. So you actually have UI APIs and not just a jQuery widget that you run and start and then never get back to again. It allows you to build with web technologies you already know and love. And yeah, of course, it's best friends with Angular.js. It uses UI router to give you complex routing and nested states. All the UI elements are Angular-based, like I said, and utilize almost no DOM manipulation, which leads to very clean and maintainable code. The styling is fully customizable. All the CSS is generated using Sass, and it's really designed to be overridden. And I think Shalom was talking about using Flexbox. Ionic actually uses Flexbox. If you haven't tried out Flexbox yet, for Cordova apps, I would definitely recommend you give it a go. It makes your life so much easier and actually makes vertical centering possible. And Ionic is also performance obsessed. All the animations are hardware accelerated. Again, like Shalom was talking about using CSS 3D transforms. All the animations are CSS 3D transform based. They run really smooth. We've tested them on older devices, iPhone 4, older Galaxy Nexus devices, and they run as smooth as any native animations. And they also provide the request animation frame method, so you can actually tie into it and build custom animations. This is basically an HTML5 spec thing where the browser basically combines all the frame update calls into one call. That way you're only doing one repaint for the 60 frames per second, and that way you get much better performance than calling animation calls the whole time. Also comes with Ionicons, which is their kind of custom icon font. It replicates pretty much all the icons that come by default with iOS and Android, but then it also comes with a whole lot more. And it's generated using IcoMoon, so you can actually extend it quite easily. We've done that for a project where we built a lot of custom SVG icons and then just plugged it into IcoMoon, and then you can use it all over our app pretty easily. So to get started, the first step is to actually install Cordova and Ionic. You can do this using npm, and you can do a global install. It's pretty straightforward, npm install Ionic. And then to start a project, you actually have to run Ionic start followed by the app name. And the last attribute there is actually lets you pick one of the pre-made templates that Ionic provides. So actually I'm going to try and show you what this looks like. Just run Ionic start my app followed by the template name. So let's download the files for you. It builds this directory out. Inside the directory you have config.xml, the Ionic project file, package.json, and the www folder. This is where the entire app sits. Ionic actually uses a lot of help, and by default they include they'll include Gulp into the project and give you a couple of tasks. In this case, they give you a Sass watcher and a Sass compiler so that you can customize all the styles yourself. And then to run Ionic, to actually run the app in a simulator, simply run Ionic emulate iOS. Oh, sorry. First you have to add the platform. Sorry, one more try. I have to cd into the directory first. now we can add iOS as a platform, and then try and run it. There you go. So that's the base template. It gives you 3 tabs. You can sort of play around with it. And again, you can follow the same steps to add Android and emulate Android. So I just wanted to take this time to talk about gulp. Take a second to talk about gulp. Shalom talked about this again. Actually, talked about a lot of things I'm going to be talking about. So gulp is a build system like Grunt, but it's actually much easier to learn and much simpler to use. Like I said, when you create an Ionic project, it includes gulp by default and gives you a couple of tasks. But then you can also extend this the gulp file to add some more tasks that will help you with your Ionic development. I just want to walk you through a sample project that I built using Ionic, just to show some of the features that it comes with. So the default Ionic gulp file gives you a SAS compiler task and then also a SAS watcher, but they use the gulp built-in watcher, which is actually quite heavy-handed and reloads every single file, even though you don't need to. So there's a gulp plugin that you can use. It's called Gulp Watch, which only loads the files that actually changed and doesn't load everything else that you need. Another really good gulp plugin is Connect. All it does is start a simple node server, and then watches for changes in HTML and JavaScript files, and then you can actually tie it into live reload and update the browser as soon as you change the code. So I'm going to build this little task called gulp dev, which basically starts a watcher on the SAS file, the SAS directory for Ionic, and watches all the HTML and JavaScript files, and then starts the web server so that you can actually debug and view the app running in your browser. And if I go to the browser now, that's the app actually running there. So the directory structure for this app, starting with beta 4 for Ionic, they actually started including the raw SAS files for Ionic, and it placed it into a top-level directory. And then when you compile the SAS, it gets put into the CSS directory and is minified and concatenated, so it's optimized for the app. This app is a pretty straightforward to-do list. You can browse a list of different lists. Each list has different to-do items. You can actually there's a slight bug in the nightly version of Ionic I'm running, so I'm going to try and make some changes, and I have live reload installed here, so you'll see that it'll pick the change automatically. So I'm just going to switch over to Ionic Beta 4, which is sort of the most stable version of Ionic right now. And as soon as I hit save, it just refreshes the page. So this is the Ionic list directive. You can pass in an array and it'll turn it into a list. You can swipe the list and set different options, attach click events to these buttons, so I can mark the item as done. It'll check it off and apply a CSS class to it. You can delete an item, or you can edit an item and it'll pop up a modal. I can change the text, save it, and it updates live. So all the data in this app is just in the browser. There's no backend, but it's Angular based, so everything gets updated and the state's there for you. There's also a search function that searches through all the different lists available to you. So and you can kind of quickly go through them. And then the settings page is just a demo of different UI elements that come with Ionic. So you have list elements, badges, nodes, toggle buttons, rangefinder, drop-downs, things like that. Standard stuff that you would expect to come with any framework. So I'm going to just walk through the code slightly, really quickly, sorry. If you're familiar with Angular, then this would look really straightforward and something you're used to. Like I said, it uses UI router, and this is where you define your different routes. You start with the core app state, which is just an abstract view and holds everything for the app inside it. And then you can put sub-states on there. So settings is a state, the list overview, the list browser is a state, building a new list is a state, and viewing a list is a state too. This is kind of an interesting state because you can pass in a parameter here, so that lets you talk to the controller and pull in the right data that you need for that view. You can also, because you're using UI router, you can actually use named views. So menu content, in our case, we're using side menus. So there's the menu on the side, and then the main content in the middle. This main content, we call it the menu content, and then by setting the template URL for menu content, you can target which template gets rendered inside that content area. The controllers, again, are pretty straightforward. Each view, in our case, we specify a controller. For the list view controller, for the browse view, you can pull in new list items. You can add an item, save an item. For individual list views, you have the delete function, the edit function, done function, and then save function when you edit the list. And lastly, you have the menu controller, which lets you do the searching and clear search, things like that. For templates, index.html looks really minimal. That's all there is. Ion nav view. That's sort of the starting place. That's the abstract app view that gets populated. Then, if you go into the menu, Ion uses hierarchy of views. So they start with Ion view, and each Ion view contains a header and the content. So in this case, the header is the little green bar on top with the toggle button, and the content is everything else, the list items. And of course, you can nest them, so you can have multiple content views inside one major view. In our case, the side menu is pretty straightforward, so I just put it all in line. It's just a bunch of list items with href actions on them, so you can toggle to go to you can toggle to go to different views. The search bar is just using standard Ionic classes to build a search bar, which looks pretty close to what you would see in native UI. And the rest of the templates are kind of the same idea. All the code is up on GitHub, so I'll post a link after in the slides, and I'll post the slides on Twitter or the group or on the meetup page, and then you can download it from there. So navigation. Like I said, Ionic uses the UI router, which lets you nest states and bind views with names, and it actually builds a really powerful state manager. But along with that, it actually lets you for transitions. So if you go from one view to the other, when you go into that view, you might want to transition towards the left, but when you go back, you might want to transition towards right. So it keeps track of that and fires off the correct transition. And at the same time, it keeps a track of multiple history states. So if you have 3 tabs in one view, it'll have different history streams for each one of those tabs, so that you can actually jump from one history to another. And that's really important because in mobile apps, the user flow isn't really very linear, so you need to be able to jump from one state to another, but still keep in mind, but still keep an idea of what's going to happen and what kind of transition you want to run. It also comes with a lot of UI widgets that replicate native behavior, so pull to refresh, slide box, side menus where you can fade the toolbar so that you have different colors when you have the sidebar open or when you have the side menu open or closed. And you can build really crazy things like swipeable cards. So I just want to go through Ionic's code pen and show some of the examples of what can be done. So this is a new directive that came out with Ionic Beta 4. It's a collection directive, which is kind of like the list directive, but more optimized. So in this case, they actually have 3,000 items in this list item, in this list container, and it still functions as smoothly as anything else. You also have things like Google Maps, built-in Google Maps plugins. This is the swipeable card, so you can actually replicate UI that's used in things like Google Now and a couple other apps. You can even replicate the frosted glass effect that you see in iOS. Pop-ups, shrinking header, which was pretty popular a few months ago. And of course, you can implement custom loading bars and things like that. So another thing I want to talk about is keyboards. If you've built a Cordova app or a PhoneGap app, you've probably had to deal with on-screen keyboards, and you probably realized that it's really hard and painful to deal with those keyboards. To tackle that, Ionic actually built their own keyboard plugin that just simply works. It's included by default in all Ionic projects now. It allows you to hide the accessory bar for iOS. You can programmatically trigger the keyboard. You can squish the view on Android so that you can make it fluid vertically as well as horizontally. And along with everything else, they actually implemented their own scrolling. So when you build a Cordova app and you use overflow to scroll inside a div, one thing you don't get is bounce scrolling. You can only get bounce scrolling on the parent, on the main container on the page, which is a really different UI experience for users compared to what they get in native apps. In native iOS apps, pretty much every single container on page has bounce scrolling. So to replicate that, Ionic actually implemented their own custom scrolling. Any Ion scroll or Ion content view that you implement in your app has bounce scrolling. You can of course turn it on or off. What this lets you do is also tie into scroll events, so you can tie scrolling into the window animation request animation frame event and animate things based on when you're scrolling. And because it's JavaScript-based scrolling, it uses CSS 3D transforms to replicate scrolling, so you get much better performance than you would do with overflow. We've been using Ionic at Rangle for about 2 months now. Used it for a couple of projects. For one of our projects, we built a slide box inside a side menu, which also had a pull to refresh container and an animated header. Doing this without Ionic would have been pretty crazy, but doing it with Ionic was really straightforward, almost worked out of the box. We've used it to do a lot of custom styling and had no problem at all. We run into a couple of issues with performance of infinite scroll on Android, but that's going to be probably resolved in the near future. Other than that, really no problems at all. If if you use Angular to build your apps, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be using this to build your next proto app. For resources, I would recommend learnionic.framework.com. That's a new site that they launched, has a bunch of different examples, tutorials, video tutorials, code samples. The Ionic code pen is actually really great. It's usually gets much faster updates than their documentation. So, and Ionic has a really rapid release cycle. So if a new version came out and you're not sure how to use a feature, go to the code pen. They'll usually have a sample there of how to use it. The community forum is really active. So is Twitter. If you post a question, you're likely to get a reply from the Ionic guys within like a couple of hours. And of course, you can contribute to the project on their on GitHub and actually find a whole bunch of other information there too. And that's about it. Thank you.